McCarthyism came as a result of the end of World War II in 1945. The United States and its allies had won the war over the Axis nations, but the fear and paranoia of those who were of the same political mindset as these communist countries was still in the air. The United States entered into the Cold War, which was not a physical war per se, but rather a time of increasing hostility between the United States and communist countries. It seemed that the word communism struck fear into the hearts of every American. The tension and negativity toward communist causes and organizations increased rapidly over the next few years. As Stephanie Kerwick from the University of Washington stated, communists were confronted with great animosity from the general public because they were perceived to be cooperating with Hitler. The radical ideas of Marxism and the violent actions of Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin did not coincide with American democracy. These feelings toward communist parties and communistic ideas set the stage for a new kind of politician. This politician was Joseph R. McCarthy. Joseph McCarthy stepped in the spotlight in 1947 when he was elected as a Republican senator from Wisconsin, although previously McCarthy had attempted to be a district attorney for the Democrat Party. McCarthy had won his election based off his military background in the Marines. Almost immediately after he was elected, McCarthy adopted the anti-communist cause and made it his primary concern. He started hunting down everyone and anyone who had or might have had any communist affiliations. Although at this time the American public was still very cautious of communists, within the next few years, public support of Joseph McCarthy's communist investigations would start to erode in 1947 after the trials of the Hollywood 10. McCarthy began his political career in the House of Un-American Activities Committee, also known as HUAC. He began trying numerous individuals for ties to communism. Among those individuals were actors, actresses, and producers such as Lucille Ball, Charlie Chaplin, and Walt Disney. But what options did people who were accused of having relations to communism have? Many of the accused chose to come out and say that they were involved in the Communist Party, whether it was true or not. This option resulted in social repercussions due to discrimination. Many lost their jobs, their reputation, and their lives. Other individuals sought leniency by cooperating with investigators and chose to admit to being communists while naming names of other people who were supposedly involved in communist activities. This scapegoat method helped move the spotlight from them to the other person while making the deflector the better American. The last option was to plead the Fifth Amendment, and this is what the Hollywood 10 did. The Hollywood 10 was a group of writers, actors, and directors. Included in the Hollywood 10 were Alva Bessie, Herbert Biberman, Lester Cole, Edward Dmytryk, Ring Lardner Jr., John Howard Lawson, Albert Maltz, Samuel Ornitz, Robert Adrian Scott, and Dalton Trumbo. They were put on trial for subliminal pro-communist innuendos. These so-called pro-communist innuendos were instances such as pointing to the smiling children in the movie Song of Russia, and noting that the Russian worker shouted "Tovark," meaning comrade, during one of the scenes in action in the North Atlantic. Evidence such as this made the HUAC trial seem inane. During the investigative hearings, members of the HUAC grilled their witnesses against the alleged association with the Communist Party. Aware that their answers could ruin their reputations and careers, these individuals cited their Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. As a response to these wild accusations and assumptions, these men refused to cooperate with the investigation and denounced the HUAC anti-communist hearings as an outrageous violation of their civil rights. They stated that the First Amendment gave them the right to belong to any political organization they chose, but the use of the Constitution turned out to be a detriment to their situation. Instead of letting them utilize their right to remain silent as a citizen of the United States, Joseph McCarthy twisted their logic and said that since they would not testify, that was enough proof of their guilt. The extremism of the McCarthy hearings started to catch on after the Hollywood 10. A cartoonist named Herbert Bloch recognized and opposed Joseph McCarthy's underhanded tactics and made it a point to publicize his opinions to the public. He realized the amount of control McCarthy had accumulated by instilling fear into the general American people by using smear tactics and bullying to identify and purge communists in government. He relentlessly attacked McCarthy's prejudice strategies. Herbert Bloch coined the phrase McCarthyism in a cartoon right after Joseph McCarthy's public accusation speech. In this cartoon, Bloch is trying to emphasize the pressure the victims were feeling and the unfairness of the trials. With such a precarious position to be placed for questioning, most were doomed to teeter and fall.
Now, how do you define McCarthyism, sir?
Mr. Huey, I didn't coin the phrase. The Daily Worker originated the phrase. Out of the first paper that used it, it's their phrase. We let them define it.
Even though some of the journalists and cartoonists were catching on to McCarthy, the general public took a little longer to realize it. McCarthy continued his search for anyone who might have been considered to have an affinity for communist causes. He gave a speech to the State Department in 1950, saying that not only should we suspect writers and actors as part of the communist parties, we should also be wary of our members of Congress who appear to be sympathetic with the Communist Party. McCarthy used his speech on communists in the State Department to rally the American public to his cause once again and to continue the momentum. Joe McCarthy said, and I quote, "I have in my hand 57 cases of individuals who would appear to be either card-carrying members or certainly loyal to the Communist Party, but who nevertheless are still helping to shape our foreign policy." Of the results of this conference, Arthur Bliss Lane of the State Department had this to say, "As I glanced over the document, I could not believe my eyes. To me, almost every line spoke of surrender to Stalin." McCarthy continued to make radical statements such as mentioned in his speeches. Also in 1950, Joseph McCarthy wrote a telegram to President Harry S. Truman trying to warn him about the 57 communists who were in the State Department, and telling the President what he should do in response to these men whom McCarthy just accused of being communists. This was President Truman's response. "My dear Senator, I read your telegram of February 11th from Reno, Nevada with a great deal of interest, and this is the first time in my experience, and I was 10 years in the Senate, that I have ever heard of a senator trying to discredit his own government before the world. You know that that isn't done by honest political officials. Your telegram is not only not true, and an insolent approach to a situation that should have been worked out between man and a man, but it shows conclusively that you are not even fit to have a hand in the operation of the government of the United States. I'm very sure that the people of Wisconsin are extremely sorry that they are represented by a person who has a little sense of responsibility as you have." McCarthy's last try to maintain the influence he had left was at the Army McCarthy hearings in 1954. At the Army McCarthy hearings, Roy Cohn, Joseph McCarthy's attorney, was accused of pressuring the Army to show favoritism towards G. David Schein, a former McCarthy advisor and a friend of Cohn's. Towards the end of the hearing, council members were becoming irritated with the irrationality of McCarthy. Joseph Welch, a part of the head counsel for the Army, publicly challenged McCarthy with this question.
Look, you've done enough. Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency? I will not discuss it further. I will not ask Mr. Cohen any more witnesses. You, Mr. Chairman, may, if you will, call the next witness.
The Army McCarthy hearing of 1950 was the start of the end for Joseph McCarthy. When the hearings ended, McCarthy lost most of his allies. Supporters of his radical anti-communist views faded away. By this time, the American people realized that Joseph McCarthy had exasperated and exploited the issues for his own political gains. Also, the Senate later voted to condemn him for his inexcusable, reprehensible, and vulgar and insulting conduct, unbecoming of a senator. This was the end of McCarthyism.